Based on the strategic options that have been formulated, based on the strategic options that strategic analysis has formulated, we decide on choosing one of those options, for implementation, right? Now, how do we choose a strategy? How do we evaluate a strategy? We evaluate it on the basis of feasibility, acceptability, downside risk, and upside potential. Let's look at these four issues in a little more depth. What is feasibility? Feasibility is essentially a question of internal consistency. A strategic option is feasible if it is internally consistent. For instance, if your strategy assumes that there will be considerable foreign investment in a particular industry, and if it also assumes that price in that industry will rise, right? These two assumptions are not internally consistent, because if there is significant foreign investment in the industry, then the supply side is going to increase. A dramatic increase in supply side will not see an increase in price. It will in fact lead to the reverse. So, feasibility is a question of internal consistency. What about acceptability? Acceptability is a question of the strategy giving results with which the different stakeholders of the company can live. We saw in one of the earlier sessions that the company has a variety of stakeholders, like the public and the government and suppliers and so on. Now, different stakeholders, as we saw earlier, have different interests. The strategy, the strategic choice, that is, the strategy which ultimately has been chosen, should be acceptable to as many stakeholders as possible, and certainly it should be acceptable to the critical stakeholders. Then there is the question of downside risk. Now, what's downside risk? Downside risk can best be answered by looking at what would happen if most things went wrong. A particular strategy might give you a downside risk where if most things went wrong, there would be a 30% fall in revenue. Another strategy, which may have many attractive features, could give you a situation where if most things went wrong, revenue would fall by 50%, right? So, in one case, the downside risk is 30%. In the other case, the downside risk is 50%. Now, it is a question of how comfortable you are, how comfortable the company is with riding that kind of risk. Now, this brings us to the last point in strategic choice, which is upside potential. Here we are talking about what is the best thing that can happen to the company by following that particular strategy. Let's confine ourselves to revenue growth. Now, we have a situation where one strategy will give us a potential revenue growth of 30%, provided everything goes well. There is another strategy which will give you a maximum growth of 20%, right? So, the upside potential of these two strategies is 30% and 20%. But that does not mean that that strategy which gives 30% is an obvious choice, because there may be problems with regard to acceptability among certain stakeholders. So, we need to look at all these issues. We need to look at feasibility, acceptability, downside risk and upside potential. GE has helped us in strategy formulation by coming up with this very attractive model where different businesses are put into different cells based on their business position and industry attractiveness. For instance, let's look at a company like ITC. Let's look at the hotel industry. So, we look at industry attractiveness. How attractive is the hotel industry? Would you say attractiveness is low, medium or high? That's one. Then you look at the other axis, business position. That is, what is the position of ITC in the hotel industry? Is the position high, medium or low? This is the position of ITC in the hotel industry. So, based on these two indicators, the different businesses of the company are slotted into different cells. Now, you will see here that there is a diagonal across the middle, right, which is selective investment, selective investment and selective investment. If the industry attractiveness is low, but your company has a good business position in that industry, you would consider selective investment. If both are medium, you would consider selective investment. If attractiveness is high, but your company's position in that industry is low, you would consider selective investment. That's really the dividing line. On one side you have invest and grow. On the other side you have harvest and divest. Okay? So, this helps us to decide on corporate strategy.